She fell in love with her savior, not knowing he was the one who ordered her family's murder. Elisa shivered violently, the orange glow of the flames dancing in her wide, terrified eyes. The heat was unbearable, yet she felt colder than she had ever felt in her life. The smell of gasoline and burning oak filled the night air, choking her, masking the metallic scent of blood that she knew was staining the expensive Persian rugs inside. Her father. Her mother. Her brother. All of them were gone. Erased in a storm of gunfire and fire in less than 20 minutes. She sat on the cold pavement of the long driveway, wrapped in a paramedic's shock blanket that felt like tinfoil against her skin. The sirens wailed in the distance, a useless, mocking choir. They were too late. Everyone was too late. Miss Vance. The voice was deep, smooth, and terrified her almost as much as the men with the masks had. Elisa looked up. Standing above her, blocking out the light of the burning mansion, was Damien Thorne. He was a legend in the city, but not the kind they told children about before bed. He was the kind of man her father had whispered about in hushed, fearful tones behind closed doors. A business rival. A predator. A kingpin disguised in a three-piece charcoal suit. He did not look like a man witnessing a tragedy, he looked like a god surveying a battlefield he had already won. "The police are going to take you into protective custody, Elisa," Damien said, his voice low and devoid of the chaotic panic surrounding them. He crouched down, his expensive leather shoes resting on the ash-covered gravel. "Do you know what that means in this city?" Elisa shook her head, unable to speak. Her throat was raw from screaming. "It means they will put you in a motel room with a rookie cop guarding the door," Damien continued, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "And the men who did this, the men who slaughtered your family, they will find you before the sun comes up. The police are on their payroll, Elisa. You know that." She did know that. Her father had paid enough bribes to know how the system worked. Damien extended a hand. It was large, steady, and manicured. "You come with me. My estate is a fortress. My men are loyal only to me. No one touches what is mine." "Why?" she croaked, her voice breaking. "Why would you help me? You hated my father." "Business is business," Damien said, his expression unreadable. "But I do not condone the slaughter of innocents. And you, little bird, are very innocent." A shadow fell over them. It was Detective Miller, a man Elisa recognized from her father's poker nights. He looked sweaty, his eyes darting nervously toward the burning house. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "We need to process the girl." Damien did not even look at the detective. He kept his eyes on Elisa. "The choice is yours. A cell with him, or a castle with me." Elisa looked at the detective's shifting eyes. She looked at the consuming fire that had taken her entire world. Then she looked at Damien's hand. It looked like strength. It looked like survival. She reached out and placed her soot-stained fingers into his palm. Damien pulled her up with an effortless grace. He took off his heavy wool coat and draped it over her shoulders, enveloping her in his scent, sandalwood, expensive scotch, and something sharp, like gunpowder. As he guided her toward his waiting black sedan, shielding her from the flashing cameras of the press, Elisa felt a wave of relief crash over her. But just as the heavy door of the car closed, sealing out the noise, she saw it. Through the tinted glass, she watched Damien give a curt, single nod to Detective Miller. The detective did not look angry. He looked relieved. He nodded back, tapping his pocket. The car pulled away, leaving the ashes of her life behind, and for the first time, Elisa wondered if she had just walked out of the fire and straight into the devil's mouth. The Thorne estate was not a home, it was a monument to power. High walls topped with razor wire, cameras in every corner, and guards who looked more like soldiers patrolling the grounds. For the first month, Elisa did not speak. She barely ate. She existed in the guest wing, a ghost haunting a palace of marble and cold glass. Damien was patient. He was terrifyingly patient. He did not push her. He simply existed around her, a constant, solid presence in a world that had crumbled. He brought her dinner himself when she refused to come down to the dining hall. He sat by her bedside when the nightmares made her scream until her lungs burned, reading to her in that deep, hypnotic voice until she fell back asleep. "You are safe here," he would whisper, brushing a strand of hair from her sweating forehead. "I have handled the threats. The men who hurt your family, they have been dealt with." "Did you kill them?" Elisa asked one rainy Tuesday, her first words to him in weeks. Damien paused, his hand hovering over the book he was reading. "Justice was served, Elisa. That is all you need to know. You can rest now." And she did. Slowly, the walls she had built began to crack. She started to mistake his control for care. When he told her not to leave the grounds, she told herself it was for her safety. When he replaced her phone with a new one that had no internet access, claiming the media was too toxic for her mental health, she believed him. She began to need him. He was the only thing in her universe that was not broken. 6 months passed. The grief was still a heavy stone in her chest, but Damien had carved out a space for himself right next to it. He bought her new clothes, elegant, expensive dresses that he picked out. He dismissed the staff members she did not like. He made her feel like a queen, provided she never tried to leave the castle. One evening, during a dinner of roasted quail and vintage wine, Elisa looked at him across the long mahogany table. The candlelight flickered in his dark eyes. He was not just her protector anymore. He was her world. "I do not know how to thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Damien stood up and walked to her end of the table. The air in the room changed, charged with a sudden, intense electricity. He pulled her up from her chair, his hands lingering on her waist. "You do not need to thank me," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You just need to stay. Stay with me, Elisa. Not as a guest. Not as a ward." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. Inside sat a diamond so large it looked vulgar, glittering like a fragment of ice. "Be my wife," he said. It was not a question. It was a command wrapped in silk. "Let me protect you forever. We will build a new empire. Together." Elisa looked at the ring. It was beautiful. It was heavy. A tiny voice in the back of her head screamed. It reminded her of the whispers she heard from the maids when they thought she was not listening, whispers about Damien's temper, about his business dealings, about how he got what he wanted no matter the cost. It reminded her that she had no friends, no money of her own, no way out. But then she looked at Damien. He was looking at her with a hunger that she mistook for love. He was the man who had pulled her from the ashes. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Damien." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. As if he had measured her while she slept. He kissed her then, possessive and hard, and Elisa felt a tear slide down her cheek. She told herself it was happiness. She refused to acknowledge that it felt more like the closing of a prison cell door. The wedding was set to be the event of the decade. The estate buzzed with florists, designers, and caterers, all moving in a terrified orbit around Damien. It was the night before the ceremony. The rehearsal dinner had been exhausted, filled with men in suits who looked at Elisa like she was a prize horse at an auction. Damien was down in the wine cellar, celebrating with his associates. Elisa could not sleep. The house felt suffocating. She wandered through the dark corridors, her silk robe trailing on the floor like a bridal train. She found herself outside Damien's private study. The door, usually locked and guarded, was slightly ajar. Curiosity, cold and sharp, pricked her skin. She pushed the door open. The room smelled of cigars and leather. It was empty. On the massive oak desk, a single laptop sat open, its screen glowing in the darkness. Next to it was an old-fashioned heavy steel safe, the door wide open. Damien had gotten careless. His arrogance was his only flaw. He believed he owned her so completely that he did not need to hide his claws anymore. Elisa walked to the desk. She did not want to look, but her body moved on its own. Inside the safe were stacks of cash, passports with different names, and a small digital recorder. It looked out of place among the clean, high-tech equipment. It was labeled with a date. October 14th. Elisa's breath hitched. That was the date her family died. Her hands trembling, she picked up the recorder. Her thumb hovered over the play button. Do not do it, her mind begged. Just go back to bed. Marry him. Live in the lie. It's safer in the lie. She pressed play. Static filled the quiet room. Then, a voice cut through. A voice she knew better than her own heartbeat. The Vance account is becoming a problem, Damien's voice said. It sounded bored. Clinical. We can squeeze them harder, another voice replied. It was Detective Miller. No, Damien said. Old man Vance is stubborn. He will not sell. And he's starting to ask questions about the shipping routes. A pause. The sound of ice clinking in a glass. Burn it, Damien said. Burn it all down. Tonight. Elisa put a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. Tears blurred her vision, hot and stinging. And the family? Miller asked. No witnesses, Damien said. Kill the father. Kill the mother. The brother is useless, get rid of him too. And the girl? Miller asked. Elisa. There was a silence on the tape that stretched for an eternity. Elisa's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Leave the girl, Damien's voice came back, lower, darker. Do not touch a hair on her head. I want her terrified. I want her broken. She needs to have nowhere else to go. You want her for leverage. No, Damien said, and the cruelty in his tone made Elisa's blood turn to ice. I wanted her for years. She's beautiful, pristine. But she's too happy. Too independent. Break her world, Miller. Then I will swoop in and put the pieces back together. She would not just love me. She'll worship me. She'll be mine because I'll be the only thing keeping her alive. The tape clicked off. Elisa stood frozen in the center of the room. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful, it was predatory. The men she loved, the men she was sleeping next to, the men she was about to marry, he had not saved her. He was the fire. You were not supposed to find that yet. Elisa spun around. Damien was standing in the doorway. He was not wearing his jacket. His tie was loose. He did not look sorry. He did not look afraid. He looked annoyed, like she had spoiled a surprise party. You killed them, she whispered, the recorder slipping from her numb fingers and clattering onto the floor. You killed them all. Damien walked into the room and closed the door behind him. The lock clicked. I did what was necessary, Elisa. Your father was a fool. He was going to lose everything anyway. I just accelerated the process. You murdered my mother, she screamed, backing away until her legs hit the desk. I gave you a life. Damien roared, his composure cracking for the first time. He lunged forward, grabbing her shoulders. Look at you. You were a spoiled little brat living in a fantasy world. I made you a queen. I saved you from the gutter. You made me an orphan. I made you mine, he hissed, shaking her. And you love me. I know you do. We are the same now. We are both survivors. I will go to the police, she spat, struggling against his grip. Damien laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. The police. You heard the tape, Elisa. I own the police. I own the judges. I own this city. Who are you going to tell? Who is going to believe the traumatized, medicated little girl against Damien Thorne? He released her, shoving her slightly back against the desk. We are getting married tomorrow, he said, smoothing his shirt. You will smile. You will say your vows. And you will be happy. Because if you try to run, if you try to speak, I will not kill you. That would be too easy. I will make you watch as I destroy every single person who even looks at you. I will make you pray for death. He turned and walked to the door. Go to sleep, Elisa. You need your beauty rest. The cathedral was packed. 500 guests. Senators, celebrities, mobsters. The air smelled of expensive lilies and hypocrisy. Elisa stood at the altar, her face covered by a veil of French lace that cost more than most people earned in a year. Beside her, Damien looked devastatingly handsome. He radiated power and triumph. He held her hand, his grip tight, a warning disguised as affection. The priest was droning on about love and sanctity. Elisa looked out at the crowd. She saw Detective Miller in the third row, smiling. She saw the men who worked for Damien, the wolves in sheep's clothing. She felt the weight of the phone tapped to her thigh under the heavy layers of her wedding dress. Damien thought he had won. He thought fear was the ultimate chain. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten who her father was. He had forgotten that before she was a victim, she was a Vance. And he had underestimated just how much access he had given her in his arrogance. Over the last 6 months, to prepare her for her role as his wife, Damien had added her name to his accounts. He had given her biometric access to his holding company so she could manage the household charities. He thought she was too stupid, too broken to understand the web of shell companies and offshore accounts. He was wrong. Last night, after he locked her in the bedroom, Elisa had not slept. She had spent hours on the encrypted tablet he had foolishly left on the nightstand, transferring. Not just money, but data. Ledgers. Emails. The blueprint of his entire criminal empire. Do you, Damien Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The priest asked. I do, Damien said, his voice deep and resonant. He squeezed her hand. Forever. And do you, Elisa Vance? Elisa lifted her head. She reached up and pulled back her veil. Her face was not tear-stained. It was stone. Her eyes were dry and burning with a cold, terrifying clarity. I have a different vow, she said. Her voice was amplified by the microphone, echoing through the silent church. Damien's smile faltered. Elisa, not now, he whispered through gritted teeth. Elisa pulled the phone from her dress. She held it up. I, Elisa Vance, promise to take everything from you, she said, her voice ringing out like a bell. I promise to leave you with nothing. No money. No power. No freedom. She tapped the screen. Send. A collective gasp went through the crowd as phones began to buzz. Not just one or two. Hundreds. What did you do? Damien snarled, grabbing her wrist. Check your phone, Damien, she said, leaning in close so only he could hear the venom in her voice. I just donated your entire liquid fortune, $3 billion, to the victims of gang violence. Every cent. You re-broke. Damien's face went pale. You could not. And the file I just sent to the FBI, the NSA, and every major news outlet in the country. Elisa smiled, and it was a smile that promised blood. It contains the audio of you ordering the murder of my family. Along with the payroll of every cop in this room. The heavy wooden doors of the cathedral burst open with a thunderous crash. But it was not sunlight pouring in. It was men in tactical gear. The letters FBI were emblazoned on their chests in stark yellow. Nobody move. Federal agents. Panic erupted. The guests screamed and scrambled. Detective Miller tried to run toward the side exit but was tackled by 2 agents. Damien stood frozen at the altar, his empire crumbling in seconds. He looked at Elisa with pure shock. He looked at the woman he thought he had broken, and saw the monster he had created. You ruined us, he whispered, watching as agents swarmed the aisle, guns drawn on him. I loved you. No, Damien, Elisa said, stepping back as the agents rushed the altar, pulling his hands behind his back and slamming him against the marble steps. You loved owning me. But you forgot one thing about things you own. She looked down at him as the handcuffs clicked shut, the sound echoing louder than any wedding bell. They can be sold. And I just sold you out. Elisa turned her back on the chaos, on the men screaming her name, on the life of gilded cages and blood-soaked diamonds. She walked down the aisle alone, head held high, walking past the bewildered guests and the shouting agents. She pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out into the blinding sunlight. She had no family. She had no home. She had no money. But as she took a deep breath of the fresh, clean air, she smiled. For the first time since the fire, she did not smell smoke. She smelled freedom.